Right now, Asa Winstanley is on the call. I've just seen, which is great. How you doing, Asa?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, Crispin.
Thank you for coming on. Now, there's a story I'd like you to talk about before we go into the other things that I've already discussed with you. It's this story about Marksman yelled terrorists and hostages were shot dead. The IDF is investigating after its soldiers defied orders in Gaza and killed three kidnapped Israelis waving a white flag. Um, do you have any information on that's not being put out by even that was the Times, I think.
Well, not really, but I think it's a real example of how, when they tried to clarify what had happened, the Israeli military, and they really made it worse because what they said was that the they thought, they thought they were a danger because they were Palestinians, and they clarified that they were waving this white flag. So what they're saying in effect is that, we habitually shoot Palestinian civilians waving a white flag. And it's just the only tragedy is that they were Israelis.
That's horrific. They could actually come out of that statement. So yeah, you're right. They suppose now what I want to say is that in the week there was an Electronic Intifada broadcast which I recommend to everyone to watch because it goes into great detail about what's actually happening in Palestine. And on this show in the week, there were so many things that came out that were of interest to me that I had no idea about. That I thought it'd be good if we could just go through them on this show as a sort of a briefing, effectively. The first one is, I saw these pictures of it. The Israelis were saying these were Hamas fighters that they had, and they undressed them because they might have weapons on them, some bizarre sort of thing. Now, can you tell us a bit about what you found about the truth about these pictures and who these people are?
Yeah, this is just a mass roundup of random civilians, essentially. And in that photo on the top right there in the truck, if you look closer, you can see there's at least two women there as well. So it's really what the Israelis are trying to do is, I suspect, I hope they're trying to find an exit strategy and, a way to end the war whereby they can say, they can project some sort of image of victory, like a false image of victory, because so far they've made no military achievements in terms of the actual military infrastructure of Hamas, the Qassam brigades, and the other Palestinian factions. There's been those photos of the men stripped naked. There's been several people in those photos who have been identified as one was a medical student. There was I believe there was a journalist, and there was all sorts of people who are known to be um, civilians and not Palestinian
Yeah.
fighters. So it's just a mass roundup. It's the kind of thing that they normally do. They do it in the West Bank quite a lot. So
Well, what was interesting from that, because I hadn't even thought that they could do such a thing as make out people with that. But that's my innocence speaking, my naivety. But the second thing was that I noticed from the show that you had this week was this story from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. IDF reports 1,593 wounded since October 7th, but hospital data is much higher. This information about the number of Israeli troops being injured has not been released until this time, isn't that right? And what can you tell us more about what the actual casualties may be?
yeah, well, look, in any war like this, in a war of occupation like this, the Americans did the same thing. They are going to, while they, so on one hand, they're undercounting the number of civilians they killed, right? Because they are claiming that the civilians, at least some of the civilians, are Hamas fighters, right? But even according to their own figures, it is, the vast majority are civilians. Even if we accept their figures, which of course we shouldn't. But on the other hand, like all occupation armies, the Americans did it. I haven't looked that much into it, but I'm sure the French probably did it in Vietnam as well. They undercount the number of their soldiers that have been killed or injured. It's the habitual, because they don't want to. It's war propaganda. This is why they have military censorship. What we have to remember is the Israeli military has a veto power over everything that's in the Israeli press. The military censors everything, and so these figures of around about 1,500 to 2,000 injured will, definitely, almost certainly, to be a vast undercount. There was actually one story in Hebrew, I believe, about a week ago, which said that 5,000 Israeli soldiers had been injured in the fighting in the Gaza Strip. And then that was then changed and edited fairly quickly to 2,000. Clearly the military censor had intervened. And so, this is what the Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, has been saying all along. They've been saying the number of Israeli soldiers killed is far higher than your government, addressing the Israelis as they do sometimes, saying the number is far higher than your government is admitting and that your government is lying to you. And they've been pretty consistent in what they've been saying all along. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, the number of casualties mean that would change the feeling in Israel, obviously, if people found out more at home. But this is another story from the same Haaretz newspaper in Israel, an opinion piece of this. Sorry, if Israel used a controversial procedure against its citizens, we need to talk about it now. Did Israel implement the so-called Hannibal Directive, which allows the military to endanger a soldier to prevent them from being captured? They're kidnapped at the hostage-taking incident on 7th of October. So, I mean, can you tell us a bit about that as well? I mean, there were protests, weren't there, in Israel on this? Do you think this is really undermining Netanyahu?
Yeah, I do think it is. I mean, I think that Netanyahu knows that he is not long for this world, politically speaking, should the war end. The demonstrations within the Israeli population are calling for the Israeli captives to be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, and Netanyahu is loath to do that. And so what that opinion piece represents is really interesting, because what it's talking about there, the Hannibal Directive, for people who don't know, it's an Israeli military doctrine which was created in secret around 30 years ago in relation to the Israeli wars in Lebanon and prisoner exchanges. And it's named after Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who fought against the Roman Empire. And what the relevant point about that is that Hannibal is reputed in history to have poisoned himself to escape capture by the Romans. He'd rather die than be captured alive. And so this military doctrine gives Israeli military forces the go-ahead to kill Israeli captives rather than allow them. If in the moment it looks like and seems likely that they are going to be captured, you can use deadly fire on the whole area, even if it means the killing of the Israeli soldier. And that is known to have happened in 2014 in the Gaza Strip. During the Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip in 2014, there was a case of one soldier who was, I forget the soldier's name, but he was killed, and the Palestinian fighters that actually did keep the body, and they were trying to negotiate over the release of the body in a prisoner exchange. And that is really when the Hannibal Directive came to light. And so, you know, it's a very secretive and sort of opaque military doctrine, but it has been acknowledged now that it exists, although there was claims a few years ago that the way it had been interpreted would be rescinded and so on and so forth. But in this war, it looks very much like that it has come back with a vengeance and may even be targeting civilians this time around. So now even some Israelis are saying there needs to be this investigation, as we saw in that op-ed.
So it totally undermines the propaganda about October the 7th, and that's used all the time to justify killing people in Gaza. I mean, it's quite clearly a bad story for Israel that's come out, and it's been put in the Israeli press. So it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. It doesn't have that kind of feel to it anymore, does it? It's actually almost it's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, it is a fact that Israelis were killed by Israel on the 7th of October. I question how many really, and was any aspect of this deliberate with the Hannibal Directive, which is now being asked even in Israel.
Yeah.
So you just put up on the.
Yeah, the other story. I mean, you've been covering this yourself for several weeks, almost since the beginning. But the other part of the what I uncovered this week that I didn't know about was the fight back from Palestine resistance in Gaza. If we look at this clip here, for example, this is quite incredible. I'm really quite amazed.
They were. And then we just see Palestinians doing it as a matter of fact. And then this guy, he's breaking out the back fence that's locked, and he's going to run across an open space here. And then watch this. He realizes, oh, there's a massive 2,000-pound bomb crater. So he can't get right up, because I believe that he would have run right up to it. But you could see his head cam look down at the hole. He stops, takes his breath, steadies himself, fires, hits in the soft part of the tank on the warhead over the tank from a significant height and hit it, which is not nothing. So yeah, just want the warhead over the tank from a significant height and hit it, which is not nothing. So yeah, just want to.
I mean, the two bits there, the Palestinian fighter hitting that tank. I mean, that's incredible that they know how to find a weak spot of a tank like that. And that seems to be, from what the footage that's being released, it seems to be quite common that that's happening, that these tanks are being hit. And the second clip was of a drone from Palestinians, which contains an explosive that blew up where all these, I think it was people who were driving tanks, they were all hit in a truck or something. This isn't reported at all. I mean, it must be, it's comparable, do you think, with Vietnam in the sense of the kind of tactics that you can't find these people, and it's going to be difficult for Israel to win, isn't it? To totally destroy Hamas, as they keep saying they're going to.
Yeah, absolutely, Crispin. I think what people have to remember is that this is a guerrilla war. This is a guerrilla war by an occupied people resisting and trying to defend itself against a military occupier. So there's a lot of parallels with Vietnam, and actually Hamas political leaders have long made that comparison, along with Algeria and others. And people still, a lot of people in terms of military analysis are still stuck in the sort of paradigm of conventional warfare, or whatever you want to call it, of tanks on a field fighting each other. But this is not that situation. You know, in Vietnam, how many Vietnamese were killed in Vietnam? It was millions and millions. You know, and yet they still kept resisting, and ultimately they were victorious. and the victory is measured in the actual military defeat, which was the way the Vietnamese won was through breaking the enemy's will, to fight ultimately, and that's very similar to what Hamas is trying to do. And these videos have been coming out weekly, almost daily sometimes, from Izzeldin al-Qassam brigades, the Hamas's military wing, and other armed Palestinian factions, including leftist factions, PFLP and DFLP. Their armed wings have also been releasing videos, not quite as spectacular as these, it has to be said, but nonetheless, they're certainly involved in the fight. And yeah, it is. I saw someone in the chat saying it looks like gaming, and I think that's almost a conscious thing. Like they have GoPro cameras, and they also have people in the military wing who focus on the media and film these resistance operations going on as they're carrying them out, and they're doing a spectacular job of taking out a lot of these tanks. And they have those rockets that we saw fired in those videos, those rocket propelled grenades, RPGs, are actually homemade. They're called the Yasin 105s. They're made in Gaza. They are manufactured by the Hamas's military wing, and they are, they're often made from recycled materials. It has to be said. They're Israeli unexploded bombs that have been repurposed, dismantled and repurposed. There's even one case quite a few years ago of Palestinian resistance scuba divers diving in the Mediterranean Sea, and they found a sunken British battleship from the colonial era, and they repurposed the unexploded munitions on that. So, and there's also this 500 kilometers, what's thought to be 500 kilometers of underground tunnels, which is in some ways quite similar to the Vietnamese resistance as well. So, the image of victory the Israelis are trying to project is very far from the truth. And it's quite astonishing how the mainstream media doesn't show these videos, the videos, because Hamas and the others released them quite a lot, and it is just they're spectacular apart from anything else. And then it's news reporting, it's free content. They should be reporting on it. This does broadcast them sometimes, and certainly Al Jazeera Arabic, but it's very rare. Occasionally you do, but it's quite rare that you see them on the mainstream media.
Well, we put them on here, and you put loads on Electronic Intifada. And the thing as well is, it's not these tunnels. It's the fact that Israel blew up all these blocks, but within those blocks, there's places people can just hide. They haven't made it particularly easy for themselves by leaving spaces for people to come out and just attack them like that, as you see in those videos.
You can see in some of the videos that the tunnels, some of the tunnels are actually attack tunnels, because remember, of course, the soil in Gaza is quite sandy, so it's pretty easy to do a tunnel at the last minute. And there is attack tunnels as well as these more established concrete tunnels, so they can very quickly do a short extension to a tunnel in order to attack Israeli soldiers in the area. And we see it in those videos happening.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you for coming on. Good to see you again. And I recommend anyone to watch Electronic Intifada. Subscribe to it on YouTube, and you'll get the update, and it'll tell you when there's a broadcast.
Just say quickly that those clips that you showed earlier on, the commentary was my colleagues John Elmer and Nora Browse-Friedman, and we put these videos on and we comment on. So we have this weekly live stream that we do it once or twice a week, usually on Mondays and Thursdays, but I think this week we're going to do one on Tuesday actually, but certainly once or twice a week while the genocide of Gaza has been happening. And we try and comment on these videos live, and it has to be said, sometimes they do get taken down by YouTube, so it's better to watch live.
Okay. didn't
They
know
don't-
that.
And so it's a bit random with this internet censorship, as you know, Crispin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, it's great to see that, and I recommend everyone to watch it. And thank you for coming on, and speak to you another time soon, hopefully.